Racism. I think most people would agree that the world would be a much better place without it. But how do we get rid of it? Well, I think I have a solution. And it first begins with knowing what the definitions of race and racism actually are. The most popular web definition of racism is such: the belief that all members of each race possess characteristics or abilities specific to that race, especially so as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to another race or races. And 2, prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on such a belief. It has 2 parts. 1, that it's a belief that one race is better than another race. Very few people today, at least in the United States, would openly say that one race is better than another. The second part talks about prejudice, discrimination, and antagonism directed at someone based on such belief. Here the belief potentially becomes an action. Prejudice, which nearly every human being who exists has been guilty of at one point or another, is fairly common, not only with race, but with things like age, socioeconomic status, gender, and sexual orientation. Think about any time in the past when you met somebody new. Did you have certain feelings about this person based solely on their appearance? We can be prejudiced to people we know very well. For example, I assume my wife is going to act a certain way when I tell her something. Assumptions and prejudice are related, and so are stereotypes. Think back to the beginning of this video when you first saw me. Oh, there I was. I remember that like it was just a few minutes ago. It was, but, you know. Some of you stumbled across this video on YouTube or something, not knowing who I am or anything about me. But you already had feelings about me. First of all, you probably noticed the color of my skin. I have lighter skin. Some would classify me as Caucasian, perhaps white. You probably had feelings related to this, especially since the name of the video was How to End Racism. Also, you probably noticed my haircut, or my glasses, or what I was wearing. You were probably judging me from the very start, without truly knowing anything about me. Then again, some of you watching this video know me very well, and perhaps you can predict exactly what I'm going to say next. Yeah! Discrimination is something my students confuse with racism all the time. They think it's the same thing. Well, it's not. Discrimination is the unfair treatment of a person or group on the basis of prejudice. So you can be discriminated against for a lot of things, such as age, socioeconomic status, gender, and sexual orientation. Fortunately, discrimination on the basis of race in the United States today is rare, at least blatant discrimination. Discrimination that's under the surface does persist. The best example I can think of off the top of my head is hiring practices. It's not legal, but again, it's usually under the surface. Remember, it wasn't that long ago in the United States that de facto discrimination was legal based on race. De facto discrimination meaning it wasn't legal technically, but it still in practice happened. Antagonism might be the simplest part of the definition of racism to understand. Basically, if someone acts out on their beliefs about racism, that's obviously racism. This seems to be the most rare today, but it does exist whether you see it or not. The last documented lynching in the United States that was brought on by racism occurred in 1981. That wasn't that long ago, because I was born that year, and I'm not that old. But what about the term race? It's fascinating to me because it essentially is a term invented to make one group of people justify that they were superior to another group of people. It's troubling to see the definitions that show up for race when you do a search. Here's what shows up. The first definition, each of the major divisions of humankind having distinct physical characteristics. A group of people sharing the same culture, history, language, etc., an ethnic group. A group or set of people or things with a common feature or features. Notice how only the first definition mentions physical characteristics, which is the race that most of us think of. In particular, we tend to think of skin color. But how ridiculous is that? I can change my skin color by going outside in July for an entire afternoon. Or messing with the visual effects in my video editing software, like I'm doing right now. See how my skin color is changing? pretty nifty, isn't it? First of all, pure race does not exist, genetically speaking. We have good old science to prove that. The Human Genome Project, the international science experiment which attempted to map the DNA of every human being to ever exist, had one important conclusion: that race, as we know it, does not exist. They said different genes for physical traits, such as skin color and hair color, can be identified between individuals, but no consistent patterns of genes of the approximately 20,500 genes found in human beings exist to distinguish one race from another. There is also no genetic basis for divisions of human ethnicity. What's crazy to me is that there is absolutely no evidence that anyone even used the term race or anything like it before the Middle Ages. In the late 1400s and 1500s, it was the Europeans who first began to use the term to justify their enslavement of people that they encountered with darker skin pigmentation in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. What did they use to justify enslaving people with darker skin color? Passages they read in the Old Testament of the Bible. So racism and race are relatively new phenomenons. So you've been patiently waiting for my solution to end racism. I got it all figured out, right? Well, here's my solution. If every human being did these 3 things, and they taught their children to also do these 3 things, I think racism as we know it would cease to exist. I know that's a pretty bold statement. 1. Acknowledge race has no genetic basis and was a term invented by one group of people to justify that it was superior to another group of people. Absolutely everyone needs to know this, and it should be taught at a very young age. 2. Acknowledge that you did not choose your physical characteristics, and you shouldn't have too much pride in your physical characteristics. Sure, you can tan, you can dye your hair a different color, you can have plastic surgery, or you could change your diet or exercising habits. The bottom line is, you did not choose the physical characteristics you were born with. Isn't it silly to be extremely proud of physical characteristics you were born with? On the flip side, why on earth would you think negatively about the physical characteristics of someone else when they were also born with such characteristics? 3. Stop using the term race to describe a person. I do not define myself by race. Not only do I feel it is an outdated term, but why should I limit how I define myself to simply the physical characteristics that I was born with? Isn't that a bit superficial? We are all multifaceted, complex, unique individuals with many different characteristics. Why should I limit to describe myself by saying I'm a white guy, or kind of a peach guy, or a blue guy, or a green guy? It's ludicrous. Labels are dangerous anyway. Sure, they come in handy, and there is definitely a time and a place for labels, but they should never define anyone. In conclusion, I want to share a new definition of racism that I came across from the American Journal of Color Arousal that they came up in reaction to the Human Genome Project findings. They said, a racist is a person, organization, or institution continuing to believe in, advocate, perpetuate, or passively accept the proposition that there are separate races among the human species, in spite of all of the well-known Human Genome Project evidence that separate human races do not exist. So there you have it. The first thing we need to do is to educate people that there is only one race, the human race. Thanks for watching.